Thank you for coming and being part of this event that we're really excited about. My name is TJ Kostecky. I'm men's soccer coach here, Assistant Director of Athletics for Leadership. First part of the conversation will be some questions that I have for Malia that I think would be interesting to get things going. And then afterwards, the second part, I'd really ask the audience to participate and so be ready to also follow up and ask questions afterwards. This is going to be recorded and it's going to be available on YouTube after we're done as well. So again, thank you for coming, and Malia Dumont, please round of applause. Delighted that you're here.
Thank you.
I'm really excited. Thank you for coming and sharing your story with us. You've been at Bard for many years, first as a student and now on staff, senior executive staff. What brought you here, and what do you love about Bard? Please share.
Well, I came here in the first place as a student because at that point I wanted to study international affairs, and it was a relatively new field at that point. There weren't many colleges where you could major in international affairs, so I wanted to come to a place where you could design your own major, and Bard is one of those places. And then I just fell in love when I visited, and just loved being a student here. And after I left Bard, I mean, I never imagined I would come back and work here. I thought I would have a career in DC, which I did. I worked in federal government for a long time, and I really liked that work. But when you work in a very specific organization for a long time, which I did in the Pentagon, it's a very specific culture. I realized after a while that you start to lose some perspective on what is normal. And as I told some people, I was starting not to realize when I was speaking Pentagonese, and I thought I need to, I like this work, but I need to remove myself from it for a while and get a new perspective, and maybe I can go back in a different capacity later. But I retain an interest in national security. I consider that my field still. But I just tracked what Bard was doing as an alum. I was a very interested alum. I loved my time here as a student, but then once I graduated and I went to grad school, and I realized, comparing my experience with the experience that my grad school classmates had in their undergrad, I had in many ways a qualitatively better experience here than a lot of them had. And so I just became more and more grateful and cognizant of the relationships I developed here. The longer I was away from Bard, the more I sort of valued what I got while I was here. And I started to realize that it's not a typical educational institution. It feels to me more like a nonprofit in some ways. It's got a mission in the world, and it's trying to do that. And so I came back here. I wanted to come back to work. I realized I wanted to come back here to work because I wanted to be involved in that mission. And I like teaching as well, but I'm not here because I want a career in higher education. I'm here because I want to help advance the mission of expanding access to education to underprivileged people around the world, and that link that we talk about a lot between education and democracy, that's very important to me too. So I feel like I can participate and support that here in a way that you really can't at a lot of other educational institutions, so that's why I came back.
Wonderful, wonderful. So you have an interesting title, big title, Chief of Staff and VP for Strategy and Policy, and of course also a faculty member. What does that all entail, please?
Sure. Well, I'm not technically on the faculty. I do teach. I just want to make that clear. I mean, faculty typically have PhDs, and they go through their own special hiring process. I haven't been through that, but as what we call a practitioner, I bring my experience. I can bring that to the classroom. So I'm not a regular member of the faculty, but I do teach sometimes. When I first came to Bard, I came on as the chief of staff. That position didn't really exist before, and it means something different in every institution. A lot of companies have that. Not every university has a chief of staff. Leon told me, because I never got a very clear job description, he said, your job is to keep things moving. So I try to make sure that things don't get stuck in the administration, or that bad surprises don't come up. And so it's something different every day. And mainly it's like an advisory role to him, and an advisory role to my fellow administrators who are like, how should we bring this issue to Leon? And I help them sort of shape how the conversation should take place with him. And then after, I guess I was here for 2 years, and then I picked up the Vice President for Strategy and Policy title, which doesn't mean anything specific either. I mean, I have these titles that really don't mean anything specific. I picked that up because there's a lot of misunderstanding, especially when I go overseas on BARD business, about what a chief of staff is. And so there were times I'd be overseas representing BARD, and they thought chief of staff was some kind of exalted secretary, and so I'd be sitting over at the executive assistant table, and that wasn't the right place for me or for BARD in whatever the gathering was. And so I added the VP title to indicate this is not an executive assistant, this is like a senior administrator.
And prior to that, this was a pretty big position, Director of Strategy in the Office of the Secretary of Defense in the Pentagon.
Yes. That was the position I held right before I left the Pentagon. And another reason I left is because I loved that job so much, and I felt like this is the best job I can possibly have. Like, I couldn't rise farther up the ladder without becoming a political appointee. I mean, there's kind of like a glass ceiling when you're a civilian, just regular government hire. You get up to a certain point, and then above that, everyone is a political appointee. And so I got to that point where there were 3 people between me and the secretary, and they had all been, Senate confirmed or whatever. And so if I wanted to stay in the Pentagon, I could have made some lateral moves, like be director for Southeast Asia policy or whatever, which would have been interesting. But to me, director of strategy was the coolest job there was for someone at my level, and couldn't stay in it forever. And I didn't really want to move to any of the other options that were open to me. So I thought, if I want to keep growing in my career, in addition to learning how not to speak Pentagonese anymore, then I should try something completely different. And that's when, just out of the blue, one of my old BARD classmates, you never know who the person sitting next to you is going to turn out to be in 5 or 10 years, but one of my old BARD classmates that I hadn't even kept in close contact with just contacted me out of the blue and said, I want you to come work in my company. And I mean, to make a long story short, at first I thought he was crazy, but then I decided after several months of back and forth, I decided I would try it. So in between the Pentagon and BARD, I ran a finance company for 2 years, and
Wow.
that was a learning experience. And part of what I learned is I'm not a finance person, and so I mean, I enjoyed aspects of the job, and it was a great leadership learning opportunity, but I missed that sort of mission, and that's why I really started thinking about how can I find my way back to BARD. And I ran into Leon on an airplane, and that's how the conversation started. And I said, I want to come work at BARD. And he basically said, okay, and then here I am.
Your timing was great.
My time was great, yeah.
What airline was it?
I think it was United. We were on a flight from Newark to Vienna. He was there for a music thing, and then I was actually catching another flight to Cyprus, where I was advising the Greek Cypriot government on their national security strategy. So
Small job, huh?
so that was an interesting trip too. But for me, the most interesting part of the trip was running into Leon on the airplane, and because
Wow.
my follow-on thing was going to be BARD.
So our topic is building teams, successful groups, successful teams. And you've been introduced to a plethora of incredible leaders. At the Pentagon, I can't begin to imagine, and what you just shared the story. And of course, Leon is, I think, the longest running president of any college in America. Mm-hmm. Can you share with us from your lens, what would be the one or two most important qualities of transformative leaders that you've seen?
Yeah. Well, I want to start by saying it's important to realize that I mean, I think every person has the ability to be a leader, and everyone is unique. So that means your leadership style is going to be different from someone else's, and that's totally fine. So I think it's useful to study leaders because you can learn from them and sort of apply it to yourself. But I think it's a mistake to say like a transformative leader is X, Y, Z, and then try to, be that person, because you are yourself and you have unique qualities. And so it's about figuring out how to marry your unique qualities with the things that you have to do as a leader, right? So, I mean, I've learned a lot from watching Leon, and he has a lot of qualities that I don't have. And so I try to figure out how I can learn to do some of those things. But I know, for example, I just don't have the same kind of creative mind that he does. Very few people do. Mm-hmm. I'm not the same kind of visionary. But that doesn't mean that I can't be a transformative leader in my own regard. So when I think about my potential for being a transformative leader, I think more about how, like, the work I've done before has been in creating new organizations and bringing people together. And that's something I'm good at. And that's a form of transforming things. Leon, he transforms things through creating new ideas. Like, we're going to do this new program. We're going to move in this new direction. So I don't think there's like necessarily a list of qualities that all transformative leaders have. But I think a lot of it is about recognizing what are your own strengths and then what does the organization need and how can you fit those things together. Does that make sense? That
makes a ton of sense. Yeah, we all have qualities, and how does that shape who we are?
Yeah.
Yeah, great, thank you. You were an athlete, and you are an athlete still. Not we're an athlete because I know you're running still and swimming. This room, there's quite a few athletes, student athletes here at Bard that have come to this event. How did that experience as a student athlete shape your vision and who you are?
Yeah, well, I didn't come to Bard thinking of myself as an athlete. One of the things I enjoyed about being here was, although, for example, I'd never picked up a squash racket in my life, I was able to just say, I want to play squash, and then suddenly I'm on the squash team. And so it was a learning experience. It was a great sense of camaraderie. I just enjoyed meeting people that I wouldn't have met otherwise at the campus. I learned how to lose gracefully and without embarrassment. It was just a fact of life that I was not a great squash player, for example, but I really enjoyed it. Those are, all the sports I did at Bard were sort of individual sports. So I know a lot of you are in team sports. I played soccer when I was a little girl, but I didn't do that at Bard. It was more like an individual thing. And so those individual things have been pretty easy to carry into my adult life, which is why I still, run and swim. And I haven't played squash in a long time, but tennis was one of my saving graces during the pandemic, I have to say.
Thank you. Part of our experiences and your experiences are dealing with struggles and challenges, and things that don't work out. I've experienced that certainly enough in my career. Can you share, as much as you're able to share, an event that you were involved in, something that you did that didn't go well? It didn't go the way you planned it, and what was the outcome? What was the takeaway, perhaps, that you learned from that experience?
Well, I'd say my entire job at the finance company did not turn out the way I expected because, and I get this is more common in the private sector, but when I was hired, this is a company that's a small company, headquartered in New York, and I was hired because they had operations in Southeast Asia, and I've always, I speak Chinese, I spent a lot of time in East Asia. I thought it would be really interesting to learn more about Southeast Asia. So I was hired to run some of their work I was going to go to Jakarta. I was really excited about that. What I ended up doing is running one of the subsidiary companies in small town Nebraska. So it was like a left turn at Albuquerque. And so I didn't expect that at all. Obviously there's some disappointment that, instead of going to Indonesia, I'm going to Nebraska. But it was a different kind of leadership position that was being offered to me instead of helping, manage some operations. It was like, you're going to be president of this company, which is now, I think it's the number 3 largest equipment finance company in the country. And it's like, okay, I'll try this. There were a lot of challenges with that. They kicked out the founder of the company, it was potentially a nightmare scenario, because the guy who founded the company was from the same small town. He hired all his friends. They were all working there together. They get rid of him and they bring me in, and I'm supposed to somehow create some cohesion among these people who just watched their friend and neighbor and boss kicked out the door. And also they know I don't have a background in finance. I didn't know what the hell I was doing with this company. And so how do you establish credibility in a situation like that? How do you create rapport with people that need to respect you and you want to work well with them? That was a difficult process, but it worked out well. And so getting back to your question about transformative leadership, I think a lot of it is connected to company culture, and I really focused on that. I focused more on that than I did learning the nitty-gritty of the finance spreadsheets and how do you work the Excel equations and all that. I had experts in the company who did that. What I was supposed to do was position this company overall to do well, and that meant creating a culture where everyone felt respected. And it turned out the founder of the company didn't treat his own friends and neighbors well. I didn't know that coming into it, but I discovered that through this process of taking on the company.
So the takeaway is how you treated, although what you lacked in knowing about finance is how you treated the people and validated them. Is that
yeah, fair? Yeah. And so they had never, the members of the company had never received any kind of briefing about here are our company goals and here's how we're all going to work together and here's why this makes a difference in the world. They'd never had anything like that. So it was a relatively easy thing for me to say, we're going to have a company meeting and we're going to, I'm going to tell you everything that's going on and then turn that into a quarterly meeting and brief people and update them. And so pretty soon everyone had an understanding of what their little thing was. Their little thing might be, I have to fill out this form every day. But now they understand how that form fits into the bigger picture, and it gives you a sense of mission and contributing to something larger. And they didn't have that before. And so I think recognizing that as a gap in the company helped create a culture that was really much more positive.
Thank you. Last question on qualities, and then we're going to pivot from here. What distinguishes those individuals that have pulled it off? Of all these people that you've seen successful in their projects, and what was the common thread, common theme, and you can include Leon as well, that have pulled it off and have been successful?
I think, a couple things. Adaptability and resilience. People Leon, you mentioned, one of my former bosses who was another real visionary. It's they have big ideas. They don't settle with their ideas. They are very ambitious with their ideas, and they expect a lot from themselves and from everyone. And they think it's possible. And they're not wedded to one particular way of getting there. They may have an idea this is the big goal, and I think we're going to go there this way. But then if something comes up they didn't expect, they figure out other ways. This is the goal, and we know it's possible, it makes sense, and we're just going to figure out some other way. And so that sense of just continual dedication to the bigger picture, I think helps people not get overly frustrated by whatever bumps in the road you run, and also helps, I think, attract other people to your cause.
Well, it's also persistence. I experienced that during COVID. When COVID happened, didn't know what was going on, and Leon spoke to all of us. And I'll never forget that Zoom, where he calmly got in front of our staff and faculty on Zoom, and he said, "Art, we will never close class. We will always have that opportunity for students. We will be in person. Certainly have an option to Zoom in, but he was so calming and reassuring at that time, more so than our leadership, actually, our leadership in this country. And he was right. And we believed him, and he carried it through. And that was a very bold thing for him to say at that point, that we're going to be fine. It won't affect classes. It won't affect the quality of the education that we do here at Bard.
Right, and it was helpful for me too. So he put me in charge of this. I'm sure you all know the COVID response, and I didn't know if that was possible. I mean, but he said we're going to do it. I said okay. I don't know how I don't know how this is going to
There you
happen,
go.
but that's the task. So we're going to meet it. So we just set out to do it.
Awesome. I'm going to ask two more questions, and I'm going to flip it to the audience. Switching gears, one of your favorite books. Can you share us one of the favorite books you've read? And
Yeah.
who and what?
I'll share with you. So it's not a short story that I think it has just really stayed with me and helped inform my life. It's called The Beast in the Jungle by Henry James. And I read that, I think I read it the year after I graduated from Bard.
The Beast in the Jungle.
The Beast in the Jungle,
Mhm.
yeah. And it's kind of a parable about a man who basically, out of this nameless fear, which he calls the beast in the jungle, prevents himself from realizing his own potential because he's just so paralyzed by this fear of beasts in the jungle. And it just really resonated with me how sometimes you think something might not work out, so I'm not going to try it, or I'm afraid that it'll be too hard or whatever. And I realized I had done that sometimes in my own life, and just something about this story made me realize that when I did that, I was taking my own choices and giving them to the beast in the jungle, and the beast in the jungle was deciding my future for me. And I thought, I never want that to be the case. Like, I want to make my own decisions. I try to have faith in myself, and maybe it will or won't work out, but I can survive whatever that is, or I'll figure out a way around it. And so I like reading that story and thinking about it helped me take more thoughtful risks, I'll say.
Great answer. Thanks for sharing. Last one. Favorite musical artist or band? What does Malia do on listen to?
I mean, my car radio is always on classic rock. I think it's 101 point something out of Poughkeepsie. I don't remember. But it's whatever my mood is. When I was a Bard student, what did I listen to? I loved Billy Joel and Indigo Girls. But I also love singing in the Bard choir and singing the Beethoven and like those big symphonic works. So it really varies.
Musician? Do you do any music?
I play the piano. I'm very amateur, but I've been doing that my whole life. So yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you. A round of applause, please, for that.
Thank you all for coming out. This is a great group.
This is fantastic.
Yeah.
Yes.
Hello.
Hi.
So I have a question. What's the biggest risk that you have taken?
What's the biggest what?
Risk.
The
So
biggest
So
risk.
the question is, what is the biggest risk that you've taken? Yeah.
Yeah. My hand, is that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Gosh, the biggest risk I've taken. I'd say in 2006, when I quit my job and volunteered to go to Afghanistan, that was a pretty big risk because, I mean, I didn't know what my career was going to be after that. I was in a job that on paper was a great job for me, but I realized I was unhappy in it. And I was already in the Army at that point, Army Reserve, and I figured they're going to send me to either Afghanistan or Iraq at some point, so it's probably better to take control if I can and volunteer, because then I have some element of choice about when and where I go. So I volunteered to go to Afghanistan, and I could have just stayed in my job, and they have to legally, if you get called up in the Army, your job has to hold your job for you. But I decided I didn't want to come back, so I just quit, and I went to Afghanistan, and I had no idea what I was going to do after I came back. But while I was there, I made a lot of really interesting connections, and I certainly would never have ended up being the director of strategy in the Office of the Secretary of Defense if I hadn't taken that step. Because from there, I got invited to go work at NATO, and then I got invited to go work in special operations policy in the Pentagon, and that just led from one thing to another. But I had no idea that it would lead to all those things. I just thought, I'm really unhappy in this job, and I need to change gears entirely, because I had been applying for some other jobs, and I realized I wasn't even getting interviews because the jobs I was applying for were slightly different from the job I was in, and I realized that these other employers already saw me as being in this kind of narrow lane, and I started to feel kind of desperate. I was like, I know I can do more than this narrow lane that I'm already in. How can I convince people of that? In the military, you don't have to convince people. It's like you raise your hand, like, I'll deploy. They're like, okay, they'll send you. So that it was great that I had that option at that point, but it felt very risky because I had no idea what I was going to do afterwards.
So what you read, you really took ownership on your own.
It was, once I raised my hand and said I wanted to deploy, then I had all kinds of people coming and trying to convince me to go deploy to work for them. And one of them was like, there was some guy who wanted me to come work. It was like a translation center somewhere. I was going to be overseeing a bunch of interpreters who were like translating things like that they found in, while people were on patrol. Like, here's a piece of paper they picked up off the ground, and you're going to oversee the translator that translates that piece of paper. I thought, that's not, I don't want to do that. That's not interesting to me. So actually part of the risk with doing this is I looked for all these different potential things I could do in Afghanistan, and none of them seemed like the right option. And I had an ace up my sleeve, which was that I knew the commanding general, Lieutenant General Eikenberry, because he had been the defense attaché in China. And so I had met him there because I worked before that. I had worked for several years on Chinese military issues, and I went back and forth all the time. And so I knew him when he was in China, and then he got moved to Afghanistan. So I wrote to him and said, I'd like to come to Afghanistan, and which is I was a first lieutenant at the time, so a first lieutenant writing to a lieutenant general is not the normal order of things. And I thought, well, I could get in really big trouble for this, but on the other hand, what does he care about some measly little first lieutenant? He's not gonna. I'm not enough of a pest that he's gonna really do anything terrible to me. So I wrote the Dear Lieutenant General Eikenberry letter, and then the next day, they're like, "You're gonna be in the headquarters. You're gonna be an analyst in the headquarters." I was like, okay.
A lot of confidence.
That sounds good to me.
A lot of confidence.
But I had no choice at that point. That was the other risk. Once I wrote to Lieutenant General Eikenberry, whatever he offered to me, it's like, you can't say no to that. Like, you have to take it. So
Awesome.
thankfully he offered me. I think Sonita had, or
Seuss, and then, yeah.
You have leadership positions, like I was at the Pentagon, like finance companies, and now BARD. Like, how do you change, or if you have to change your leadership style? Like, how do you do that based upon who you're leading?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because it goes back to the idea of culture. And so you can't find two cultures much more different than the Pentagon and BARD, right? And so the way I interact with people is very different depending on the place. So the Pentagon, the military, is very hierarchical and very structured. And so, there's just a way of communicating and a level of information people expect, like, we're going to meet at this time, and the meeting is going to have these 3 goals, and then by this time frame, we're going to accomplish X, Y, Z. And so it's very, very organized that way. And so when I was director of strategy, I had, I think, 15 people working for me. And they all had very specific portfolios, which also had congressional oversight. So there's a lot of my work as a leader there was about the organization that was required because of the structure and the missions that we had. Here at BARD, nobody reports to me, and we don't have that same kind of like very hierarchical structure. There's a lot more flexibility. And so the leadership I exercise here is more about, I suggest a lot of things to people. I have a lot of room to like stray into areas that interest me, even if I have no specific responsibility for it. Like I couldn't do that in the Pentagon. It's like you stay in your lane. Like you do, your job is this, and somebody else's job is this, and you don't go into somebody else's job. But here there's a lot more room for all kinds of conversations, and so as I said, part of the leadership I try to exercise here is about bringing the right people together and exploring new kinds of interactions and engagements, and just helping smooth the way for that. I'd say the other difference is in an organization like the Pentagon that's so hierarchical, it was very important for me to open doors for the people who worked for me, because of how hierarchical it was. Like they couldn't get in to talk to a higher level leader, whereas I could. And so if I knew that one of my people was working on something really important, it was up to me to make sure they could get in front of the right people, like higher up, to advance their idea. So I really thought of myself as, in some ways I was an assistant to the people that worked for me, because my job was to give them a platform. And that's like, I don't have to have that role here because it's very easy to just talk to people. They're not closed off behind certain doors, or, it's just it's a lot more fluid here. And so it's more about advancing ideas rather than leading people through the bureaucracy, if that makes sense. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hi, Malia.
Hi, Sunita.
Good to see you. Thanks for sharing. So my question is that you mentioned Leon has a few qualities and you don't, and yet he put you in charge of running the college.
What?
To make the things move. Is that like something, is that true, or do you have those qualities? Maybe he is the only one who sees them?
Well, that's a good question. So first, I just want to make clear, I don't personally run the college. I think, so I think one of Leon's good qualities as a leader is that he doesn't surround himself with people who are exactly like him. Like he brought me on, not because he wanted someone just like him. I mean, clearly I'm quite different, but he saw, one, that I really care about this institution. I'm willing to dedicate myself to it and work really hard. And that I can bring things that he doesn't. I mean, if you've ever been inside the man's house and seen his study, I mean, this is not an organized person in some ways, right? He's got the stacks of books all over. I mean, that would drive me nuts if my own study was like that, but that's his style. And so I think the fact that he's so open to working with people who have a very different style, and I think he really enjoys the sort of the surprise factor of introducing me to people. Is like, this is my chief of staff, Malia, who used to work in the Pentagon, and nobody ever expects that. So he gets some enjoyment out of that. But we also have a lot of really interesting discussions. We disagree on a lot of things. And not in a disrespectful way. It's like, just about things in the world sometimes, or decisions that need to be made here. And a lot of times my instincts are exactly the opposite of his. And then, so this is how I learned too. Like, well, my way would have worked as well, but his way has like these different pros and cons associated, and it works in a different way. And so I'm starting to ramble now. Does that answer your question?
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
I have a two-part question. One,
A little bit louder, please.
I have a two-part question, but one was just, how do you navigate the obstacles and other relationships with people, especially as a woman in leadership, and also there was another part of my question, but I forgot.
All right, well, I'll take that one on first,
Can
and then
you
you
repeat
can
the
follow up.
question so that-
Yeah, so how do I navigate the obstacles of associated with leadership, especially as a woman? I'd say, I mean, so it may be strange to hear this, but when I was in the Pentagon, I mean, I've never thought of myself as I'm a woman leader. I just think, I'm the leader. I'm the director of strategy. I'm not the woman director of strategy. I kind of tried to stay away from thinking myself in gendered terms. And it wasn't an issue at all in the Pentagon or the military. I didn't really notice it until I went into finance, which is way more old white male dominated than any other environment I've been in, and just the kind of language they used, the casually misogynist language, that they didn't even, it was just part of their lexicon. They didn't even realize they were speaking this way. And I remember I was at a conference. There are a lot of conferences in the finance industry. I was at a conference, and some guy was, I think he thought he was being supportive, and he's like, well, you can go to the ladies who lease luncheon. Won't that be nice? Because there's so few women in equipment leasing and finance that they're trying to, like, whatever idiots thought this was a good idea. Like, the way to support women in finance is to create the ladies who lease luncheon, and which happen to be taking place at the same time as, like, the main keynote address. I'm like, I'm not going to the ladies who lease luncheon. I'm the president of the company. I'm going to, like, I belong in this other meeting. I don't want to, like, sit around with, I don't know who these other women are, like, and talk about our manicures. I don't know if that's what they expected. So I just, when I have, on the occasions that I have run into expectations that I felt like were inappropriate, I just basically ignored them and it's like, I'm not going to stand for that. That doesn't apply to me. And fortunately, I really haven't run into it that much. And I don't know if, I mean, maybe I'm lucky, or maybe I just don't notice because I don't want to notice, and I'm just going to keep doing what I want to do, which is be the leader in whatever space I'm in. And yeah, maybe I should think of myself more as an example for other women who want to follow. But I literally never thought of myself that way, and never like sort of set myself up in that way either. So it just hasn't been a big part of my thinking generally. Does that answer your first question?
Yeah.
Did you think of your second one?
Yeah, you kind of answered it. But I was just wondering, like, as a leader, or for anyone who's a leader, whether active or passive, how would you suggest dealing with maybe the doubt that comes along with that?
The doubt that comes along with being a leader? That's a great question. I remember, so not long after I became director of strategy, which is not a job I ever would have, I might not have applied for it if I hadn't been invited to apply for it. I just, like, a lot of the jobs I've come into have been because people saw something in me that I didn't necessarily see in myself. So when I approached Leon and said, I want to come work at Bard, in my head, I thought, I'm going to be assistant director of some international program office. That's what I thought. He comes back and says, you can be vice president. And I said, what? Same thing happened with the finance company. My friend called me up and was like, I want you to run this, and before that, the first time I really ran into that kind of level of doubt was when I was selected to be the director of strategy. And my first reaction was, this is the coolest title. I love this job. This is so awesome. And then about a month into it, I had this sort of panic attack because I realized, especially in government, a lot of work in government is behind the scenes. So you can toil away and do your job, and you're never a known quantity to the public. But when you get a title like director of strategy, suddenly, like, you become a public figure. And I was like really nervous. I hadn't realized that aspect of it until I was actually in the job. And how did I handle it? I mean, at first I thought I wasn't going to be able to, and I had a really vulnerable heart-to-heart with my boss, and I didn't even know what I wanted to say to him, except I was like, I don't know if I can do this job. Like, that's, he's the one that selected me for it, and like a month into it, I go and I'm like, I don't know if I can do this. And he, I think he saw that I was really in distress, and he sort of reassured me and said, well, let's see. I mean, I thought he was going to be like, okay, fine, you know, you can go back to doing what you were doing before. And I would have been fine with that at the time, but I think that would have cut me off from all kinds of future leadership roles. So he said, let's see how it goes. And so I stuck with it, and I just sort of made it through with his support. I mean, knowing that he was, he continued to be supportive of me even as I was doubting myself. That was really helpful. You know, sometimes, I guess I have two different kinds of faith. I don't always have faith in my specific pieces of knowledge, but I have sort of a generalized faith that, you know, I'm not a stupid person, and I can figure a lot of things out. So even if I don't feel ready for whatever specific situation I'm confronting, I think I can figure this out somehow. And then if I don't feel completely ready, I try to find my faith in other places. So, okay, so Leon thought I was ready for this job. You know, he's smarter than I am, so maybe I'll just put my faith in him. Like, if he thinks I can do it, then maybe I can do it. And so I'll choose to believe in that. And so I guess there's a little bit of almost fake it till you make it in some
Well, I
of
think
those.
you also touched on a real important quality of leaders. Leaders seek transformative qualities in other people,
Yeah,
you know, in your journey.
Mhm.
And be in that position where you're in that position of mentoring others to find great things within them.
yes, yeah, absolutely.
So,
So I'm very grateful for all the people who have seen those qualities in me that I didn't necessarily see in myself.
wonderful.
Yeah, you talked a lot about culture.
Yeah.
And with every new leadership role, you've had some pretty official ones. I'm sure you have to take your culture with you there. How do you convince people to buy in, and then how do you deal with pushback?
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, so the question is about culture, and different organizations have different cultures. So how do you bring culture to different organizations, and how do you deal with pushback? So yeah, there's a happy medium to be found between the existing culture in an organization and whatever you want to bring to it. So, like, I knew coming here from the Pentagon, I wasn't going to bring Pentagon culture to BART, right? But what could I bring here? It's, you know, like my understanding of how to support what we would say in the Pentagon, how to support the principal. So the principal in this case being Leon, or whoever the senior person is at the time, that kind of staff work. And so part of what I do here is to help my colleagues who haven't been exposed to that same kind of staff work that we did in the Pentagon. It's just like muscle memory there. How do you get someone ready for a meeting? How do you help someone get ready to give a big speech? I mean, Leon he can't do all this on his own. That's what we're here for, to help him, you know, exercise leadership. So I've tried to bring the good parts that could be relevant here from the Pentagon and teach some of my other colleagues like how that works. I haven't really got any pushback specifically, but I'm thinking like other places where I have got pushback, like when I was running the finance company, the guy who had founded the company, he was all about making money. That's all he wanted to do, which is not unusual in finance. But my boss, the Bardian, who bought the place and wanted to turn it into something a little bit different, had a really different vision for the kind of culture he wanted to bring to it. More of a family style, and this company can do great things for other people. It's not just about making money for us. And some people resisted that. It was a real shift, and one of the things I learned from that is, I mean, you may run into toxic people at some point, and it's toxic people are some of the most difficult, as a leader, as a manager, some of the most difficult people to deal with, whether they're above you or below you. In this case, it was one of my vice presidents was a toxic person, and it's. We sort of dithered over it for a long time at the senior leadership level. How do we manage this? Because we thought if we pull her out too quickly, then we're going to be setting up her subordinates to fail and like have a really hard time, because she just controlled them so much that they hadn't been able to grow into their positions. We weren't sure if they were ready for that. So we didn't want to sort of put them in a bad place. But one of the things I realized there, we ended up, after a while, we finally pulled her out. And those people that had been underneath her, they just blossomed almost overnight. It was amazing. Like the fears we had about how they might run into all kinds of difficulties didn't materialize at all. And one of the things I learned from that is if you run into a toxic person, you just got to get rid of them. Because the longer, like you might try to figure out what's the best way to get rid of them, how can you ease them out, the longer you keep them on, the more you're punishing the people who aren't toxic. So hopefully it doesn't come to that in many situations, but in some situations it's
You
necessary.
have no choice.
Yeah.
Thank you. Anyone else? Yeah.
My last question. So, not to upset Leon, but do you think you would ever become the president of BARD or another college?
All right, so the question is, would I ever become the president of BARD? So I told Leon that I don't want to be a college president. I mean, not that the job is being offered to me, right? I don't have a PhD. Generally, that's considered a prerequisite. I'm not interested in getting a PhD myself. Ultimately, the decision is up to the Board of Trustees. They're the ones that hire whoever the president is. But I told Leon I'm not really interested in being a college president. I don't think that I would be hired to be president here, and I'm not interested in working at some other college necessarily. So he was really pushing me for that. He's like, you need to get a PhD because then you could go off and have this great career as a college president somewhere. And it's like, I know, I don't want to do that. And he was so surprised. Like, so no, my career path, I think, I'd be happy to go run some other kind of organization, a nonprofit, or go back into government. Like that's where I see my path going. I don't know how long I'll be here. Sorry, I kept this only in case Leon called. He's the only one I would interrupt for.
Is that him?
No, it's a notification. I'm supposed to see him in a few minutes. Yeah, I don't think it's going to happen.
I think we have time for probably one more question. Yes, Tim? Yeah.
Just following up on your response about the question about that when you have doubts, it sounds like you always have confidence going to your manager, which I think is a really important lesson. You talked about going to whether it's Leon but do you also have other mentors that you would talk to, like, okay, I just took this position, or I'm running into this issue? Do you have a core group of mentors that you would talk to?
I wouldn't call them a core group, but I do have mentors from different places in my career. And I'm pretty lucky that I've had, for the most part, I've had great bosses. It hasn't always been the case. The job that I quit in order to go to Afghanistan, like that was, I was still pretty young at that point, and now I understand that part of my unhappiness with that job is I felt like my boss didn't understand and really respect what I could bring, and I just was underutilized and very frustrated. So I never went to him at that point to say, I'm unhappy here or this isn't working. I have, depending on what my question is about, there have been certain points in my career when I've been at a crossroads. One of them was when I was deciding to leave government, and am I going to go work at this finance company, what other kinds of opportunities are available for me. And I reached out to a bunch of people who had sort of made themselves available to me before. I'd either worked for them or with them, and they had taken an interest in me. And interestingly, I don't have, I mean, maybe it's because I've been in mainly male-dominated careers. I don't have any woman mentors. Like, I haven't ever reached out to, I just haven't had them. But I feel like the advice I've had from all the men that have been real supporters and champions for me has helped me get to the place I am now, which is a place I'm pretty happy with.
Can I follow up, because I'm pretty interested in what you saw at the Pentagon. You said that you were in the military, so in a very hierarchical and male-dominated environments. Did you see the role of women changing during that period, or were there more women moving into leadership positions, or was it really just based on the quality of the individual?
So certainly, so I was in the Pentagon for, I want to say 8 or 9 years, so it's through a couple different administrations. Under the Obama administration, there were a lot of women political appointees. So at one point I had, like, my boss was a woman, and her boss was a woman, and her boss was a woman, and then the secretary. And so it was pretty common to have women in, really high leadership positions there, and I was surrounded by them. So it wasn't as male-dominated as you might think in the Pentagon. Now, most of the time I was there, I was working as a civilian. When you're in uniform in the military, it's a slightly different balance. I've spent most of my military career in military intelligence units, and they tend to have a higher percentage of women than a lot of other kinds of units. I'm currently in the civil affairs unit, which is much more male-dominated. But it hasn't been an issue for my career. Like, I don't feel like I can't talk about my career with the people around me. I mean, there's something very liberating about wearing the uniform. Like, everybody's wearing the same uniform, everybody's doing the same job, and there's a lot of kinship in that.
We don't want you to be late for Leon, obviously. We want you to stay on board. So before we wrap up, anything else that, this has been extraordinary, by the way, thank you, you'd like to share with the audience tonight as a last message?
Well, I'm really glad that you set this speaker series up. This is great. I mean, nothing like this. Well, first of all, this building didn't even exist when I was a student here. And certainly there wasn't such a large group of people interested in leadership. So I think it's tremendous. I didn't think of myself as a leader when I was a student here. And you don't have to push yourself to, like, be what you think a leader should be. I mean, as I said before, everyone has unique qualities, and you can bring that in certain ways to improve whatever organization you're part of. So I would say that, like, exploring what you think your own strengths are is going to help you be a better leader in whatever space you want to work in.
Thank you.